The United States of Biafra USB opened a European command headquarters in Germany, marking a major diplomatic milestone following the earlier establishment of a Biafra embassy in Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. These moves are being celebrated globally by Biafra supporters. The German government allegedly showed indirect support by sending delegates to the opening ceremony alongside representatives from African countries like Namibia and other nations in Asia and Europe. The headquarters is seen as a strategic hub for diplomatic engagement, enabling Biafrans to hold bilateral talks, discuss defense and airspace matters, and form international treaties, signaling a shift to formal diplomacy. Massive turnout from global Biafran supporters was reported at the German event, including professionals like scientists and doctors, all committed to restoring the Biafran nation and strengthening its international presence. Namibia became the first African country to recognize Biafra diplomatically, according to the report, which Biafran leaders claim is part of a growing global acknowledgement of their cause. There is a rising fear and resistance in Nigeria's political north, especially in places like Aso Rock and northern states, as IPOB's diplomatic and grassroots momentum continues to grow. Tensions are high in regions like Imo State, where armed clashes and youth resistance are reportedly increasing, aimed at pushing out Fulani political influence and defending Biafra territory. Some critics have linked Biafra diplomatic expansion to global anti-terrorism narratives, comparing their resistance to how Israel defends itself and asserting that Fulani expansion is viewed as terrorism internationally. International attention is reportedly shifting towards the Biafra issue, especially concerning the continued detention of Nnamdi Kanu despite court orders. This is framed as a human rights violation under global scrutiny. Biafra leaders claim a growing alliance with oppressed groups even in the northern part of Nigeria, such as the Hausa people, who are reportedly waking up to political subjugation and are now engaging in resistance inspired by Biafra's diplomatic strategies. In the early days of June in the year 2025, a historic and emotionally powerful event occurred on European soil that sent ripples across continents and deep tremors through the heart of Nigeria's political stronghold. In Aso Rock, the United States of Biafra, a government in exile representing the dreams and aspirations of millions of people of southeastern Nigerian origin who have long sought independence, officially inaugurated its European command headquarters in the Federal Republic of Germany. The event, held in the city of Mannheim in the state of Baden-Württemberg, was more than a ceremonial affair. It was a bold political statement, a diplomatic declaration, and a global milestone in the long, painful journey of the Biafran movement, a movement that has evolved from an armed secessionist effort in the late 1960s into an organized global diplomatic campaign in the 2020s. The gathering in Germany was not merely attended by passionate Biafran nationals from the diaspora. It was marked by the participation of a wide array of influential figures, including German local and national delegates, African political representatives from nations such as the Republic of Namibia, and even delegates from countries in Asia and other parts of Europe. The presence of these international delegates, though not necessarily official endorsements from their respective governments, was widely interpreted by many Biafra observers as a quiet but undeniable signal of growing international recognition. The event's symbolic power lay not just in the ribbon-cutting or the hoisting of the Biafra flag, but in the exchange of diplomatic pleasantries, the delivery of speeches, and the ceremonial assumption of office by Biafran foreign ministers, diplomats, and defense officers in Europe. Among the speakers at the event were prominent Biafran leaders who have for years worked underground or in exile. These individuals, most of them educated in Europe and North America, are fluent in global diplomatic language and savvy in international law. They spoke of sovereignty, defense strategy, international alliances, and bilateral engagements. They emphasized that the Biafran cause had matured beyond domestic agitation and protests into a structured political mission with offices, treaties, and foreign support. The event was streamed live on several online platforms, watched by millions of Biafran supporters across the world, from North America to Asia and across the African continent. This development came only months after the United States of Biafra had made international headlines by opening what was described as a diplomatic mission or embassy in Washington, D.C., the capital city of the United States of America, that office situated in a discreet yet symbolically significant part of the city near the embassies of other recognized nations had already raised eyebrows in many quarters. Critics of the Nigerian government accused it of sleeping while a government in exile slowly gathered diplomatic legitimacy and carved out international alliances. At the same time, supporters of the Biafran movement saw these developments as vindication of their decades-long sacrifices, arrests, imprisonments, and loss of lives in the pursuit of a self-governing homeland. As expected, the reactions back in Nigeria were swift, tense, and divided, while the southeastern region of Nigeria, particularly cities like Arba, Eri, Enugu, and Onitsha, erupted in celebration with motorcades, church Thanksgiving services, and community feasts in support of the symbolic victory. The mood in Nigeria's capital Abuja was one of fierce strategic meetings and political panic. Aso Rock, the presidential villa and political nerve center of Nigeria, reportedly summoned emergency security meetings in response to what was now viewed not as a domestic disturbance, but a transnational diplomatic movement. Reports emerged of internal tensions in the Nigerian presidency, with key officials from the northern region, particularly from states such as Katsina, Sokoto, Kano, and Kaduna, expressing deep concern over what they termed the silent internationalization of the Biafra agenda. Some senators from northern Nigeria, speaking under anonymity, admitted to journalists that the rise of Biafran diplomacy posed a serious threat to Nigeria's unity in ways not seen even during the three-year civil war of the late 1960s. According to these lawmakers, the situation is particularly dangerous because this new generation of Biafra leaders is not armed with AK-47 rifles or rocket launchers, but with law degrees, international passports, diplomatic networks, and political wisdom. They operate not from forests, but from offices in Brussels, Geneva, Berlin, and Washington. Perhaps the most intriguing diplomatic twist came from the Republic of Namibia, a southwestern African nation with its own history of colonization and political resistance. Delegates from Namibia were not only present at the German event, but also reportedly gave speeches of support and expressed solidarity with what they described as the legitimate aspirations of oppressed peoples worldwide. A few days later, a confidential report emerged claiming that Namibia had become the first African nation to recognize the government of the United States of Biafra diplomatically. While the Namibian government has not issued any official confirmation or denial of the report, Biafran leaders have hailed the development as a diplomatic breakthrough. They argued that Namibia's history of being formerly colonized by South Africa and its own armed struggle for freedom makes it morally inclined to identify with the Biafran cause. Back in Nigeria, the immediate consequence of the German headquarters inauguration was a new wave of panic, especially in the northern political and military elite. For many years, Nigerian security forces, particularly the Department of State Services and the Nigerian Army, have been heavily focused on silencing Biafran activities at home, from arresting activists to banning rallies and designating certain movements as terrorists. But the new developments abroad have exposed a strategic blind spot in Nigeria's national security architecture. A government in exile, once considered laughable, now conducts meetings with foreign diplomats and issues public statements recognized by international media outlets. In the southeastern region of Nigeria, the emotional atmosphere was electrifying. Streets were decorated with Biafran flags, traditional drummers performed in open squares, and intellectuals from universities in cities such as Nsukka and Omuwa delivered public lectures on Biafra's diplomatic renaissance. Young people, especially those in their 20s and early 30s, flooded social media with hashtags celebrating the German headquarters and reminiscing on the sacrifice of earlier generations. Videos circulated showing elders wiping tears as they watched the event from their living rooms. We may not have lived to see Biafra in the 1960s, but our grandchildren will live in a free Biafran nation, one elderly woman in Omuwa was heard saying in a viral video. However, not everyone was in a celebratory mood in the northern part of Nigeria. Youth groups, religious leaders, and traditional rulers issued stern warnings against what they saw as the Nigerian government's weak response to secessionist threats. Some Islamic clerics in Kano and Zaria gave fiery sermons urging the federal government to act fast before the country disintegrated. These fears were compounded by recent clashes in the southeastern state of Imo, where unknown gunmen believed to be affiliated with the Biafran Liberation Army engaged in direct combat with federal security forces and Fulani-linked vigilante militias. These clashes reportedly led to casualties on both sides and intensified Tensions in the region, many Biafran leaders continue to insist that their actions are not aimed at war, but at diplomacy. In fact, several speakers at the German event compared their movement to the formation of the modern state of Israel. They argued that just as Jewish leaders formed government in exile structures and diplomatic missions across the world before finally securing a homeland in 1948, Biafrans are now following a similar path. Some went as far as to say that Fulani political expansion in Nigeria mirrors terrorist tactics condemned internationally, and that Biafra's struggle should be seen within the context of global anti-terrorism efforts. Meanwhile, human rights organizations based in the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland have started turning their attention toward the continued detention of Nnamdi Kanu, the most vocal and high-profile figure in the Biafran independence movement. Despite multiple court rulings in Nigeria that ordered his release, the federal government has kept him in custody, citing national security concerns. International observers have now started labeling this detention as a violation of human rights and due process, and some prominent lawyers have submitted petitions to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Interestingly, there are now reports that some ethnic Hausa communities in northern Nigeria are beginning to connect with the Biafran diplomatic strategy. This development, if confirmed, would be unprecedented. The Hausa people, long seen as culturally and politically aligned with the Fulani elite, are now reportedly starting to question their political position within the Nigerian Federation. Community leaders in towns such as Baki Jigawa and parts of Niger State have allegedly opened informal channels of communication with Biafran diaspora leaders. These channels are said to focus on shared grievances, such as lack of infrastructure, marginalization, and political manipulation by central power structures. The situation remains fluid, complex, and emotionally charged for the Nigerian government. The challenge is no longer just about suppressing domestic agitation, but managing international perception. With diplomatic offices now operating in two of the world's most influential capitals, Washington, D.C. and Berlin, the AFA is no longer just a Nigerian story. It is now part of global conversations about self-determination, minority rights, and post-colonial justice. No longer are liberation movements confined to bush warfare or ideological manifestos. The 21st century freedom fighters are now wearing suits, speaking multiple languages, understanding international law, and building embassies. Whether the Nigerian government will respond with reform, repression, or reconciliation remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: Biafra is no longer in the shadows. It has stepped onto the world stage, and the world is beginning to pay attention to understand the full significance of what took place in the city of Mannheim in the Federal Republic of Germany. It is important to revisit the historical and emotional origin of the Biafran dream. The Republic of Biafra first declared its independence from Nigeria on the 30th day of May in the year 1967. That act, carried out under the leadership of Colonel Chukwu Michael Ojukwu, a military officer and intellectual, sparked one of the most devastating civil wars in modern African history. The war lasted for 3 years, ending in January of 1970, when Biafra surrendered and was reintegrated into Nigeria under a policy officially termed "no victor, no vanquished." However, those words did not prevent the deep scars and trauma that followed. More than 2 million people, mostly from the Igbo ethnic group, died during the Biafran War, many of them children and elderly people who succumbed not to bullets, but to starvation caused by deliberate economic blockades. Images of malnourished Biafran children with swollen bellies shocked the world and remain to this day one of the most painful memories in African history. Since that time, the dream of Biafra never truly died. It lived in the memories of survivors. It was passed down in family stories. It was spoken about in whispers in marketplaces and in universities. And as the decades passed, especially with increasing marginalization, injustice, and political exclusion felt by the people of southeastern Nigeria, the dream once again began to grow, this time not just in villages or among former soldiers, but in the hearts of young people. By the early 2000s, new voices began to rise in the Biafran movement. Among the most prominent was Nnamdi Kanu, a British Nigerian citizen who established the indigenous people of Biafra and created a powerful radio station called Radio Biafra. Through this channel, Nnamdi Kanu spoke to millions of Biafrans both in Nigeria and in the diaspora, rekindling the vision of independence. His messages stirred emotions, evoked forgotten pain, and reignited the hope for a sovereign homeland, but his activities also brought him into direct confrontation with the Nigerian state. He was arrested several times, and at one point in the year 2021, he was forcefully repatriated to Nigeria under controversial circumstances from Kenya, an act widely described by international legal experts as an extraordinary rendition and a violation of international law. His continued detention, despite rulings from Nigerian courts ordering his release, has become one of the rallying points for Biafra. Globally, this is why, at the inauguration of the European Command headquarters in the Federal Republic of Germany, many speakers held up pictures of Nnamdi Kanu. Some wore clothing bearing his image, others carried banners calling him a prisoner of conscience. The demand for his release is no longer just a Nigerian issue. It is now a matter being discussed by international human rights organizations, legal advocates, and concerned global citizens who see parallels between the Biafra case and other historical cases of oppressed peoples across the world. One of the most emotional moments during the German headquarters ceremony occurred when an elderly Biafran woman, identified as Mrs. Chinyere Uche Okonkwo from the town of Efiko in Ebonyi State, took the stage. She had survived the Biafran War as a teenager and had lost 3 brothers to starvation during the war. We are looking at successes recorded by Biafra agitators. Remember that recently we saw an open of Embassy of Biafra in Washington, D.C. As the is going on, we see yet another victory, another area of excitement. This another open of embassy in Germany. It's like of embassy open this, yes, but quite different. What we had at the center of the world power. At Washington, there the ruling nation in the world was actually located at Washington proper, and kudos to the President of America, Donald Trump, for that support, and all the people working with the government, and it shows the recognition of what is going to the detriment of other people too. But we need such an embassy, because it is time for us to start high level of diplomatic engagement with the international community, but that's the essence of that. Washington embassy located right there in Washington, but to support of many, and we are seeing the first ever European head exporters located in Germany. So it's like a regional, yes, I said the entire Europe, yes, they call it European headquarters. As more I see coming, it tell you that these people are resident, and therefore people that have set their hand on the restoration of a nation that have existed, and that was what was talking about
No, there was a
country that was the consciousness that is driving most of those things, and we must continually, celebrate, even though who is still in detention in just custody for the news that is breaking. I do not know the motive behind it, but whoever that of that argument, WHE from the federal government, whether from the F people, from the delicious commission, from the NBA, from the presidency, will not be tried and stuff, but we want to send a signal to over 85 million of bans all over the world GA is unstoppable. We are moving ahead. I was surprised that, German counselor, I sent a delegate to the command headquarters. It's not in Assyria. We have delegates from different government. We have delegates from, other part of the world. We have delegates from India. We have delegates from, Africa too. To the greatest surprise, the president of Namibia too, that have recognized the first African country that has sent signaling recognition of different government. Also delegates to German. So it is not a joke, and it's for celebration all over the world, even though we're not taking our eyes out from family, but nobody is taking their eyes out. Everybody is committed to it. Nobody's surprised. We are seeing this development. Yesterday, if I can tell you, is breaking news. It was massive all over evil. It was a got, for us to have different, European command, headquarters that inter-German government, for that support I must give that it was a year. Because at the time the embassy was open, the resolution is some people, of course, enemies of were working behind the scene to see how they could shut that embassy down. But now we are seeing another open. Please, they have a lot to contend, of course, what they saying now that, with the level they have gone with the international community to get the EU attention to, and just, of course, the Western world, and of course some Asian country. We
need to have, a specific place,
where we continue our in judgment, with the international committees that will begin to sign bilateral the issue of defense, government, territory, headquarters, airspace. Everything will be discussed business. Treaties will be signed here. Some top powerful figures around the world, has been looking for a place they can actually be outside, Nigeria, or individual promises, where they can actually sit down, and begin to carry out as diplomatic engagement, like diplomacy when it come to intellectual politics, that is, where the game is And I can tell you, a lot of members, all over the world, we have professionals there, we have doctors, we have scientists, all from extraction, are ready to put their expertise to play to make sure that, at the end of the day, we begin to see coming out to say as a nation and begin to build some defense, concerning the fact what is happening around that Nigerian applause at this moment. And we must understand that even the politicians themselves, the right of for the likes of Ben, who is the deputy speaker, to all these people are trying in whatever way, to bring political toughest to. But there's massive resistance, from people all over the world. And you can see what that has brought to the extent that there's so much panic in the northern part of the country has come to, take on the world. Okay, now let me jump in here because some people are looking at the Fulani conquest as a threat to the colonization, but let me take you to state in this regard. So recently some men were spotted in the street wounded and fully armed, and of course the police in that has spoken that they are aware of the situation and that they have prisoners to go. And make sure the question I'm asking is why not the police headers who now find it to be in the Japan within 187 of I find it difficult. Like I always said, they said the problem is some people know, and we know that if they cross the red line we treat them the way Israel is currently treating Israel enemy is now about it, and the world is going to back it up. The word is rising against any terrorism is whatever it is, whatever this guy, the word is rising against. And we can see now, what is happening because of the anti-resistance, because of the resistance, I'm going to be evil resistance. You can see that going now and state that, that the people, the youth are rising up, against every area, every location, every camp of the even to an extent the governor of realize himself that it is no longer to the people have listened, and is not to lose the grip of seeking for a way to bring this in politically and otherwise socially, and otherwise economically, and otherwise it is a no-go area. It's a very tough signal for the fan in the north because they see that the game is up for them, and they can tell you that it is no longer funny for them to continue to look in their land, because the different people have discovered that the political try compromising the security of that place by accepting political conquest from the north. But now you see that the game has said that you have seen what is happening in the Middle East now. And if President, I've already set delegates, to make sure that at the end of the day, and we know that what the issue of is settled, then he can come around, and the one will now support on how to get along with Biafra in Africa, especially the issue of charges in the middle aspect of now speaking people communities in those areas. Now they are trying to bridge and layers with the movement and make sure that the excesses of this have been running away, back to where they come from their master. We know their master is a former president of Nigeria here, and they know that's where they're running to, and very soon question the role behind what transpired in the issue of Kano in Kenya. Yes, even after the court of law have granted, he refused to release. So a lot of things the international communities are watching, but I can tell that there's nowhere in the world AP is tagged as a terrorist. Apart from it, red line, is there a red line that cannot cross or must not cross in the land of course? They know that they've already said it, as what to control the Southwest through religion. They cannot do the same thing in the Biafra land, and that it doesn't. Yes, the red line, and the consciousness is that, Biafra is going to take the conquest to them in just no time, and you will see the difference will going to be clear. The youth are trying to liberate themselves, and they're looking at they know very, but it is only in Biafra that can defeat this fan, politically, militarily, and otherwise. About that, because of the area, let me quickly ask this question, because I can clearly see on a woman who is currently lamenting about the conquest of the houses by the fan, when that these are people who came from the Gambia in 15th and 14th century, and in 19th century they successfully established an empire, which is equally seen as the caliphate, that as we speak the houses are saying we are tired of this manualization, this subjugation, this total
control, but I don't think they can
that's why the document yesterday, and from the report we are getting, that the entire 19 states of the North governors, there's no man as governor, and for what is happening now, we learn there was an emergency meeting to discuss the development of Biafra, IPOB, the government election all over the world, and is a serious signal to them. So that emergency meeting was to see how they are going to cope with the rising influence of Biafra all over the world. So it's already a victory to them, and the Outas themselves are capitalizing on this development to see how they can change the status quo. You can see most of them are talking about now making, and you can see that was the one who in the word, who give them that consciousness, to the extent that they have begun to regain consciousness on who they are, and what they represent, especially in their land that was originally called land. What we have
Was land, but you can.